All right, we'll go ahead and get this webinar started so that everybody can get back to watching either the Chiefs or the Royals or both. A cool evening in Kansas City sports for sure. So welcome to this webinar that will touch on this potential change to our city government that we'll all be voting on, if you live in the city, of course, that we'll all be voting on November 5th. My name is Amii Castle. I will be moderating tonight's panel discussion. I am a professor at KU. I've been a professor for about 8 years. Before that, I actually practiced law in downtown Kansas City for about two decades. I do a fair amount of volunteer work for the Douglas County Dems, and I am also, I sit on the Douglas County Dems Executive Committee. I'm going to introduce our two panelists, and then what I'm going to do is give a very quick education, if you will, on what this potential change would mean for our city government. But first off, let me go ahead and introduce our two panelists who will be answering my questions this evening. So Courtney Shipley, you want to wave your hand there, Courtney? Courtney Shipley served as a Lawrence County Commissioner from 2019 to 2022, including a term as the first Latina mayor of Lawrence. Courtney has also served as the chair of the Lawrence Association of Neighborhoods and served on the city's Board of Zoning of Appeals, as well as the advisory board for the Transient Guest Tax Grant Program and the boards of the Lawrence Preservation Alliance, the Friends of Oak Hill Cemetery, and the Lawrence Sister Cities. She is co-creator of the podcast Lawrence Asks Why, which explores this particular ballot initiative for the change in government through interviews with past mayors, commissioners, city staff, and community members. And I've listened to the podcasts, and they're very good. They're worth your time. Our second guest this evening is Dr. John Nalbedean, who is a former faculty member of the School of Public Affairs and Administration at KU, where the doctor specialized in preparing graduate students for careers in local government. Also, Dr. Nalbedean served on the Lawrence City Commission from 1991 to 1999 with 2 terms as mayor. John was asked to chair the task force looking into the modifications to our city government that we'll be talking tonight. And Dr. Nalbedean, I want to talk a little bit more about your work on that task force here in just a moment. So the task force prepared a report that the commission used to get us where we are now to vote on this potential change in our city government. So what I'd like to do is go into a little bit of my professor mode, if I may, and just give a quick rundown of what this would mean, how it would change our city government, because as you'll see, it won't be particularly clear when you actually read the ballot initiative. So there's our panelists for this evening. All right, so this is what you're going to see on your ballot. Okay, this is the language that you're going to see when you cast your ballot. And hold on a second, I think I've got things covering it up. And so this is the language. Shall the city of Lawrence, Kansas abandon the commission manager form of government and adopt a modified mayor council manager form of government and become a city operating under a modified mayor council manager form of government? That's the ballot language. What does it mean? Well, there's quite a bit to it that I want to break down. I also wanted to let you know, and I think our chair of the Douglas County Dems, Melinda Levon, is going to drop a link in the chat You can, if you'd like to look at your full sample ballot, you can do that at myvoteinfo.voteks.org. So how this came about, you might hear tonight reference to what we call Resolution 7442. It was actually a city ordinance, a resolution that was passed by the city in February of 2023. And this ordinance is the document that explains this potential form of government and actually authorizes this to be placed on the ballot, whether we change our form of government. So what do we have now, and what's the potential change in government? So right now, what the city of Lawrence has is what we call a commission manager form of government. And so as many of you, I'm sure on the webinar know, that commission is comprised of 5 city commissioners. The potential change to the government would be to move to a mayor council manager. So that's the terminology, okay? And that's what you're going to see in your ballot. So what does that mean? What does the change mean? Well, right now we have 5 city commissioners, and those commissioners serve 4-year terms and with elections every 2 years. And what those commissioners do then is each year they vote for who's going to be the mayor and who's going to be the vice mayor. So that comes up once a year. I believe that the commission can actually change that. It doesn't have to be once a year. It could be longer than that. But currently, that's how we get our mayor, is those city commissioners vote on who's going to be the mayor and who's going to be the vice mayor. So what about this proposed change? What would that change? Well, the biggest change that you'll hear about is that we would have an elected mayor, okay? And so rather than having the city commissioners to elect the mayor, it would be elected by vote, okay? And a popularly elected mayor would then serve a term of 4 years. Now, the mayor in voting will not, at least as proposed, will not vote with the city commissioners on every vote. Rather, the proposal is that the mayor only votes if there is a tie in the commission. So if it's a 3-3 vote, then only the mayor or that would be the only time the mayor would cast that vote. So with this mayor council manager model, we've got the popularly elected mayor for a 4-year term, and then we would have 6 council members, whether we refer to them as council or commissioner members, I'm not quite sure, but they're referred to as council members. And so let me explain how these council members would operate. So 4 of the council members would actually be elected in specific districts. So right now, all of our 5 city commissioners are what we call at large. So our city commissioners don't have to live in a particular area of the city in order to be elected. So they are elected at large. And so what this new change of government would do, it would make 4 of those council members be district specific. And then 2 of those council members would be at large, so they could live anywhere in the city. And so these council members, similar to our current commissioners, would serve 4-year terms, and their elections would be staggered. And notably, for, I think, for purposes of thinking about this change, when so the districts, the boundaries of those 4 districts will not be determined until after the election, and it will be determined then by those currently on the city commission. So with respect to the city manager, so we've got the mayor piece of it, we've got the commission / council members piece of it, and really under this proposed form of government, the role of the city manager really wouldn't change all that much. The city manager would still provide the commission with administrative support and do the day-to-day functions, operations of the city manager. So with that, whoops, sorry. Now I would like to stop my share. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful. And with that backdrop, I'd like to start, Courtney. So what was the intent, or what were people saying needed to change? Why the commission even entertained the idea of changing the form of city government?
Well, there's been a group, and I hope Dr. Nalbedean would speak to this because he's been one of the people who's wanted this for many years, who've been asking to have a directly elected mayor, specifically a directly elected mayor, for a long time. And when Commissioner Finkeldine and I came in, I don't think it was really a comment on whether or not he and I agreed with it. It was that we were willing to have a community conversation about it. So it came to the city commission because he and I discussed it while we were on the campaign trail, and we agreed that, whether you like it or not, it's important to have a conversation about it. And so we opened that up, and the commission agreed to have that conversation. And then that was how the steering committee came about, which is where Dr. Nalbedean was able to be involved in that.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Courtney. So John, about that being on that task force back in 2021, can you speak a little bit about what that was all about? Who else was on the task force, and then what y'all were actually looking at to propose?
Sure. Thank you. We were charged with looking at some changes. Specifically, it was like a directly elected mayor and council members that might be elected by district. But what we did was we had a really, I think, admirable, qualified group of members from the task force, and what I want to say most importantly is that while this looks like the proposition is going to be about, while the changes look like they are going to be fairly dramatic, they're not going to be that dramatic. In the first place, we are an outlier right now when it comes to how we elect our mayor. Something like 70% of council manager cities like our form of government have a directly elected mayor. So that really is not unusual. What I also want to say is that while it looks like big changes are on the ballot, they're not as big as you might expect given the grand scheme of how local governments are organized. This mayor that is being proposed, this mayor the city manager does not report to the mayor. That is probably the most important element of the way we are thinking about the mayor's role. A lot of times when people think of a directly elected mayor, they think of mayors in large cities where the form of government is really patterned in many of those places, is patterned after the way state and federal government is organized, a separation of powers, separate but equal. In what is being proposed now, the mayor will the mayor will not be able to direct administrative operations. The city manager does not report to the mayor. The city manager reports to the governing body as a whole. Now, the term governing body itself is unique to council manager government. There is no similar term when we talk about state or federal or in what we call strong mayor government.
So Dr. Nalbedean, can I interrupt you just for a second?
Yeah,
Because I
sure.
want to make sure that everybody is on the same page. So you said under this new form of government, the city manager is not beholden to the mayor. But isn't that the way it is currently, right? Doesn't the city manager currently sit at the pleasure of the city commission?
No, the city commission, yes, but not the mayor. But the way
Right, but currently, so under our current form of government and this new proposed form of government, the mayor would not have the power to control the city manager. So that piece of it doesn't change, right?
it doesn't change, and that is the most fundamental element of a council manager government.
Okay. Well, and you know, I understand that your position that the changes wouldn't be that drastic, and talking about how many other cities directly elect their mayors. But just to put a point on that, while it might be that a majority of cities directly elect their mayor, for us, it would be some kind of big changes, right?
Yes, and I think it would be positive, and for the following reasons. I think, say, two people running for mayor. I think what is the way I think about that. I think about the attention that's being given to the two candidates for the district attorney's office. There's two candidates. It's a highly visible. I think a lot of people are very interested in it because there are the two people who are running. And I think that attention to local government and to the issues will be more prominent with a directly elected mayor. And that's the main reason why I'm in favor of that. Oh, well, it's not just me, it's the task force recommendation.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. So, former Commissioner Shipley, so what do you see as potential upside or downside to a directly elected mayor, and mind you, to a 4-year term? Because I think for some people that 4 years seems like a lot. I don't know. I'm just trying to get the information out there. But can you tell us, in your view, how a directly elected mayor for a 4-year term might be good or bad for the city?
Well, I appreciate Dr. Nalbedean explaining that in theory, this is the duties of the mayor are as yet not declared by this commission, and they won't be outlined until later when the ordinance is created. So we don't really know. For example, we were told that the mayor would not vote except in the case of a tie. They could change that after we voted for it. That is one detail that could be changed later. That is, and I've seen the letter from Randy, so don't worry. That is one of the details that will be outlined later, and they are not tied to that resolution, which Randy again verified. So we need to be real careful about people understanding what it is that the mayor does. So I guess one of my questions was always, the mayor now could be 2 years. The commission could do that now. Our Marcy Francisco, our senator, she served at a time when the mayor served for 2 years. We could do that now. We don't need to change our form of government to do that. The other thing is, as outlined, the duties of the mayor are not different now as with this change of government. So the real question is, what is this perceived change of power in a directly elected mayor if they don't get any additional powers? If they have the same job description that they have right now, why is it necessary to have one directly elected? And my understanding from the people who, except for Dr. Nalbedean, who I think has a purely academic reason why this is a good idea and sees it as a positive, is that very powerful special interest groups perceive that as something that they can access more than the rest of us can. And they're pretty clear about this. And there's historic examples of this where mayors have in fact stepped out of line and done a run around the city management or gone directly to city staff to get things that their constituents wanted. And that is not good. That is corruption as far as I'm concerned. There are some people who have more access to our government than other people. That is a negative. Now, that's not really possible right now. In order to get something going or to move an initiative forward, you need 3 of the 5 commissioners to agree on that. And there's no misunderstanding about whether one of those commissioners can do something behind closed doors without the rest of the commission in an accountable and transparent way. And so it's deeply concerning to me, particularly when I hear from special interest groups very clearly want directly elected mayor for this reason. And it may be a misunderstanding that they think this is a strong mayor system, which I could completely understand. And speaking with as many people as I have and Mr. Stumbling Bear and doing our research for our podcast, there were lots of people who misunderstood that. But that's their expectation. And we should wonder, as people trying to protect our democracy right now at this time, what we've seen in the last few years with our attacks on our democracy, we should be very concerned about what special interest groups expect out of this change. So that's one of the things I see as a drawback, that they perceive this as a position of power that they can access outside of transparent processes.
Dr. Nalbedean, do you have a response to Courtney on that?
Courtney and I have had, this conversation a couple of times before. And the way I see it is that Courtney is oriented to preventing bad things from happening. And my orientation is, let's create a structure where we can make good things happen.
Okay.
And I think, Amy, I want to say, I think that's a fair description. And again, we live at a time where we've had an attempted overthrow of our government. So the structure of our local government, which is nonpartisan, thank goodness, right now is very egalitarian and requires complete transparency of motion. And we should be really proud of that.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Courtney. So I have a question about the idea, the notion that the popularly elected mayor will only cast ballots or only vote when there's a tie. And Dr. Nalbedean, I want to ask you, because it's my understanding that the task force that of which you were a member advocated for the mayor to be a full voting participant, not just a tiebreaker. Do I have that characterized right?
Yes.
And if so, what was the thought of the task force on that?
The task force did recommend that the mayor be a voting member of the governing body, and that's because we wanted the mayor to be an actual member of the governing body rather than just a legal member of the governing body. And so we thought that by voting, he or she would be much more involved in the discussion and having an impact on that discussion rather than, sort of distancing him or herself and sort of threatening a veto.
So, okay. So, interesting. Thanks for that perspective. And so I guess my question is, and that didn't win the day, right? Because ultimately in this proposal, it would be that the mayor only votes to break a tie.
Now, it was a recommendation of the task force. So the city council changed that.
Right, exactly. And that's why I just want to be clear that everybody understands that while that was the task force's recommendation that the mayor be a full-on voting member of the council or the commission, that didn't win the day, as if you will. And so I just want listeners to understand that this system, this mayor council manager system, would mean that the mayor only votes to break a tie. So my question, given that would be the form of government, do you think that like voting less makes the office of the mayor less transparent? I don't know. I'm just kind of throwing that out there. Courtney, do you have a response to that?
No, I don't think that's true. I do want to say something really great that Commissioner and former Mayor Finkeldye brought up, and I think it's a fantastic point, which is if a mayor mostly never votes, then that mayor can always say, well, I would have voted that way. They voted however they voted, but I would have voted it. And they can always say kind of whatever they want. And in a sense, they may not have the same kind of accountability. They're not going to have a voting record, for example. And my counterpoint to that, although again, I think a brilliant observation on his point, is again, since there's this perceived power of what a mayor is, whether that's real or not, is perceived. And if it's perceived, I mean, it's kind of reality. Then what can you do to mitigate the power grab of a member of a body that in theory is equal, but is not equal, has some perceived power? And so the suggestion was, well, they could vote in a tie, and that does another thing. It does two things. Number one, it's going to change the pool of people who want to do that job. People who want to do this job, they want to vote. They want to vote because they want to show the people who put them there and supported them there what they believe in and that they're doing what they wanted. If you are a mayor who doesn't vote, your job's totally different. You're running the meeting and you're getting consensus. Right now, there's really, a good mayor does try to get consensus. Not all mayors do that. Many of them are there to vote for their issues that they want to see passed or their interest groups that they want to push forward those projects. They don't really care about consensus. And so if you have a directly elected mayor whose main job is to run a really good meeting and get consensus from people who have disparate views, that's a different skill set. Now we're talking about a very particular group of people with a particular kind of temperament. And I actually think in that sense, you could get much better mayors because these are mayors who are trying to get people who have ideological divides to come together, and that is their main job in the meeting, not to vote, not to get what they want their project through, but to get these other people to make good, balanced decisions.
So if we decided to elect our mayor, might the cost of actually campaigning for that position, might the cost of campaigning actually exceed what a potential mayor would be paid? And we actually don't know how much the mayor would be paid. Like, there's a lot of things open, but I was wondering if either of you could speak on that potential issue, as far as the costs of campaigning to be a mayor, potentially, exceeding what the role pays. Dr. Nalbedean, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think there's any doubt that it will cost more to run a campaign. I mean, I think that's pretty clear. Um, um, I have sort of mixed feelings, and I'm sensitive to what Courtney's saying about special interests. But one of the things that I learned when I was running way back when was, if you can't raise money, then you're not going to be, and well, first of all, you're not going to be a popular elected official. But I think community support is indicated in some ways by your ability to raise money. And, do you have a wide appeal? Where is the money going to be coming from? And so on and so on and so forth. So I think it's not so much your money. I mean, if a mayor ends up spending a lot of his money, I'm not keen on that at all. And I don't think Courtney is either. It needs to be people in the community who are supporting. I remember I had never run for office before, but the first time. And I remember the first time I received, a campaign received money from somebody that I didn't know. It was like, oh my God, I'm really in the game now. It was such a foundational moment, and realizing if people who don't know you are providing you with support, that's what you're looking for.
So, Courtney, do you have thoughts on campaigns, cost of money, and who might that impact?
Well, I agree that at least the mayoral, directly elected mayor, the costs of doing that will rise dramatically. As I've said to many people who ask me about this, the least amount of money that someone raised and became the mayor of Lawrence that I know of in the last 10 or 12 years was $8,000. Now, $8,000 is an accessible amount of money. We should want regular people, single parents, people with part-time jobs, to be able to become a city commissioner, and yes, to one day be the mayor, because we are, part of this is a government of non-professionals. We don't, in America, we say we don't breed a royal, dynasty that produces our electeds. We're doing it ourselves. We're leading ourselves. So we should want to make it as accessible to regular everyday people as possible. I can't say that about Wichita, where they raised, over $170,000 to be mayor for a job that only paid $70,000. So there's a clear power imbalance there. And we do talk broadly about campaign finance reform in the United States, although we don't get very far with it. At the local level, again, what we have is a far more accessible democracy than at the national or the state level. We know you're going to have to raise more than $170,000 to become a state senator or, a congressman. We know that. But at the local level, a regular everyday Joe, so to say, can do that job. And that, again, is to our benefit. That makes it accessible to women, people of color, again, people who are perhaps underemployed but have very valuable skills and voices that we need to hear. And I would personally hate to see us make a change that diminishes that.
Thank you. All right, let's sort of move from the mayor piece of it to the council members, and the fact that 2 of those council members would be at large and 4 would be would come from specific districts. So, Dr. Nalbedean, I believe that the task force that you were on recommended that all 6 of the city council seats be district specific, no at large. Did I characterize that right for the task force?
Yeah, the task force wanted, we did agree with the 6, but we did that. We talked about all kinds of we talked about all kinds of possibilities, because there are really throughout the country in council manager governments, there are all kinds of different ways of electing people. I mean, there's even you could have districts, and a person has to live in the district, represent the district, but is actually elected at large. I mean, that's a possibility. It's not going to happen here. But we looked at combinations of at-large and district and how many we should have. And we came down with the idea of 6 districts rather than 4 districts and 2 at large. And that was because 4 districts, that's like almost 25,000 people per district. And to get 25,000 people, you're going to have to lean on the west side of town an awful lot. And so the idea of sort of neighborhood areas that we have now that are kind of looked at as political, enclaves, with 4 districts, that's going to be a real challenge. So we also thought that it will be cheaper to run by district rather than at large. And so that was a consideration.
You mean cheaper for the candidate, right?
For the candidate, yeah. And then also there was the idea that a couple of our task force members raised, which we resonated with, which was the idea that with smaller districts, it may be that we would encourage people to run for office and to become involved who might be intimidated by the notion of the larger districts. Also, the idea of districts and combinations of district at large, there are all kinds of combinations throughout the country. So whatever we decide on will not be uncommon.
Thank you. And so Commissioner Shipley, if you could also, I'd like to get your take on the districts, and just to make sure, again, all of our listeners understand, while the task force suggested 6 districts, what we're actually voting on is 4 commission seats with specific districts and then 2 at large. So just want to make sure that we're accurate. And so Commissioner Shipley, do you have any thoughts about how this new form of government would work as far as good or bad for Lawrencians?
Well, there's a lot of mixed feelings. I actually hear less support for districts than for directly elected mayor when I've talked to people. But that's kind of neither here nor there. The concern I have is that because we expected that portion, the districts to be on the ballot. It is not on the ballot. The only thing on the ballot is basically directly elected mayor and the change of government to directly elected mayor. And we did no public engagement. The city did no public engagement. They had the steering committee, but they didn't do any polls, Lawrence listens, none of that we would normally do on districting. And I'm pretty disappointed in that because I think that would have given us a lot more information about how people feel about districting. And we did that because we thought it would be, we understood that it would be on the ballot. It is in some sense referenced in the, not the ordinance, but the 77477. But yeah, that that is not directly put to the public. So we won't really know whether people really support districts or in a sense that's more clear to me. So I find that disappointing. The other downfall of the suggestion that the city commission made is that you could end up with a commission that is a majority from one neighborhood or from one district. And that is problematic as well, because one of the reasons people want districts is they feel that they're underrepresented. People from the east side of town inevitably think the west side of town is more powerful, and the people on the west side of town inevitably think the people on the east side of town have more influence. And so one of the theories is, well, if we have districts, then we'll know that I have someone who's representing my neighborhood or my side of town. And if we have a situation where a majority of the commissioners all come from one district, that could be manipulated very quickly. So I find that very concerning. At the base of it, I'm not against districting. I just don't know that it does what most people in Lawrence, I don't know that it does what most people think it does. A lot of people are concerned with representation, not on their side of town, but with racial representation, gender representation, those kinds of things. And they believe, because it's been shown in other states to do that. For example, California is the example I give. They went to districting through lawsuits because they had whole Hispanic neighborhoods who had never been represented by a Hispanic person. And so they were forced to do districting, and lo and behold, those neighborhoods were represented by people who lived in those neighborhoods who were Hispanic. Lawrence has never been geographically set up that way. There's not an Asian neighborhood. There's not a African-American neighborhood. There's not a Hispanic neighborhood. So that particular kind of representation, if that's the representation you're looking for, you're not necessarily going to get that out of the kind of districting that this votes for. And in fact, as I suggested before, it may divide that vote up because we are pretty homogenous, whether we like it or not. We have a very low number of people of color percentage-wise in our demographic. Mm-hmm. So it may literally split those votes if you believe, and I think that's a pretty big if, that's how people vote. I think that would suggest that the voter's not very savvy and would only vote for, what do they call that? Just based on very obvious representation and not on the issues at hand.
Terrific. So Pat Willard, do we have any questions, audience questions that have come through?
We do indeed. Let me pull up the questions. To some extent, this has been a great panel. I think a lot of these have been answered, but there are 3 that have popped up, and I probably have a 4th. So let me go with those and see if the august panelists would like to add anything to what they've said prior. First one, arguing that the change will enable good things to happen is an ineffective argument unless it can be shown that these good things can't happen under the current structure. So do our panelists have an answer for that?
So is it not broken? If it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of thing?
I think that's what the question is. Yeah. Or you could also say, well, why aren't good things happening under the current structure? So I guess you could go either way on that. So it is broken, this doesn't fix it, or it's not broken, so it doesn't need fixing.
I think we're reaching a size where we need a little more, we need more focus on issues. We need more just people paying more attention rather than only when they're affected. And so I think moving to the directly elected mayor, it will really sort of raise, in my mind, raise more visibility for local government here in Lawrence.
And my counterpoints, which I always want people to understand how much I respect and admire Dr. Nalbedean and how it pains me to disagree with him ever. Unfortunately, I feel that I must. The people know what the issues are. The candidates are the candidates because, they're of their time and that they are being receptive to the people. I'm just not convinced that that's how you get the visibility of issues. The issues are visible because they're important to the people. The other thing is I feel like it leans into, frankly, for my generation, kind of an antiquated top up, bottom down leadership model that is no longer what's being asked for, certainly for my generation and the 2 generations behind me. We're looking for more egalitarian, better, although messy democracy, not more top-down management. I would also say that, in terms of leadership or continuity, again, this commission could have a 2-year or 3-year, 4-year mayor if they wanted to. They could do it tomorrow. They could do it on Tuesday. Yeah, tomorrow. They can do it tomorrow. But they have opted not to do that for a number of reasons. And, as far as, being a connector, mayors can do that now. Mayors can be doing those things. They just can't make irrational promises, and any wise mayor wouldn't make promises. And I don't want to see us move in a direction that would create conflicts of interest, and again, leaning into corruption or the more or less purchasing of candidates to get what they want for special interest groups. So I'm just not convinced that there's anything that, and even by Dr. Nalbedean's own description, there's nothing that they're adding that the steering committee suggested adding to the powers of the mayor. They outlined the exact same things the mayor does now. If there's an initiative that people want the mayor to be pushing forward and be a cheerleader for, the mayor can do that. The other thing that is always lost in this conversation is our strategic plan. We have a strategic plan for almost everything. That's our leader. What we should want is leaders who are pushing our strategic plan forward. And when that plan is met and we've met all those requirements, is pushing for a new strategic plan. Not just whatever butterfly we're chasing every year, but an actual plan for the future. And so this idea that one person is going to, fix all your problems is one that I just don't think people are buying anymore. And not to mention that if you want to change our form of government to match what's at the state and federal level, a lot of us aren't feeling that. We are getting a much better engagement on a personal level from our local government than we ever do from our state and federal government here in Lawrence, and in my experience. So again, I don't want to move away from something where we have so much access to our representatives. You can call and email all of your commissioners today, and I'm willing to bet that you'd hear from, talk to on the phone, or meet all 5 of them for coffee by the end of a week. Show me Kansas City, where you can call Mayor Lucas and you can meet with him for coffee by the end of the week, or the mayor of St. Louis. These are places where the head is some obvious cult of personality, and that person is now suddenly responsible for all your woes and all your joys. I just don't think that's realistic, and I think it's a move backwards for our democracy and not forwards.
I think I think when Courtney gives examples, she gives examples like Kansas City, St. Louis, Wichita. Those are big cities. And I would not be so, in favor of a directly elected mayor if the city council actually chose its own mayor now, rather than it being determined by tradition. The top vote getter, gets a term as mayor. The second place person gets a term as mayor. Now, that may be, sometimes that may not happen, but that's the way it's been. And so you can end up with someone who really, okay, I'll give this example. I am aware of a situation that occurred in Lawrence when the mayor had to come to the forefront. And after that episode, the mayor said, "I'm counting every meeting until I no longer have to be mayor." I don't want that. I want a person in the mayoral job who wants that job.
Well, a couple things. Number one, you could always say no. And even when it was my turn to be mayor, and I had lots of reasons for wanting to do that, I thought long and hard about whether there was someone on that commission who was better than me, because I'm a thoughtful person and that's how I am. Anyone could say no. They could all agree to have someone else be the mayor. Commissioner Finkeldye could be mayor for 4 years. I don't think that would hurt us, to be totally honest. The other thing is, if your issue is with how we pick it by tradition, the tradition is chosen by popular vote. That's how we choose everything. The next mayor who comes up is the one who got the most votes. That's how we would choose them if we had run for mayor. They got the most votes. So I don't really see that as being particularly undemocratic, because the tradition, such as it is to choose the person who got the most votes in order. So I mean, that's democracy. It just happens that we didn't write it down. If you'd like us to write it down, of course, we could do that. The other thing is, if you have a bad mayor for 1 year, it's 1 year, not a big deal. If you have a bad mayor for 4 years, who's counting down the meetings until they leave, that could be a much bigger problem.
Thank you, Courtney. Pat, do we have another question?
We have a couple more really good questions. This one comes from a former mayor who says, "My perception is that our current system doesn't give a mayor enough time to pursue long-range projects and cedes control over our long-term visions to unelected managers. What do you think?" The panelists?
Well, I think that's accurate. I mean, you're a mayor for 1 year.
Well, again,
that doesn't necessarily mean you can't, that the commission couldn't say, "No, we'll want you to," but that doesn't happen.
It did used to be that it was codified as 2 years. My understanding is when Senator Francisco was on, they did serve for 2 years. That was in the ordinance. They could do that. And maybe it would be a good idea. As far as not being able to provide leadership on long-term projects, again, that's what we have strategic planning for. That's why we have all these plans to push those plans forward. I don't think that if you have a cohesive commission and you pass a project from one mayor to the other, that means a total loss of that project. I think that we should be, as voters, thinking about how we can vote for people who work well together to keep projects and long-term things happening and moving at an efficient pace. That's not one person's job. That's the whole commission's job. So it should be in our best interest to make sure we vote for people who can make good decisions and who are interested in compromise and who can listen to other people's viewpoints and move towards the middle on decisions. Again, I think this is just a difference between a top-down idea of what leadership is and a community-wide idea of what leadership is.
You know, we've moved into a new phase of politics and problem solving, where so much interjurisdictional communication, collaboration is becoming more and more important. And the idea of having a mayor for 1 year to represent you in those networks, that's really, in my mind, it diminishes the force of the way these networks are evolving and are going to be more and more powerful. Our jurisdiction, see, okay, I won't go into that.
Well, I want to say I agree with you on this point, which is, and then I can only think of one example recently, or even in the 4 years that I was there, that I agree with you on this issue, which is the Panasonic plant. Okay, well, all these cities, their chambers, their city management, they're all getting together regularly, trying to figure out how they can capture these secondary businesses from Panasonic. And I'm not gonna lie, it is a little weird to halfway through a conversation have a new mayor come in and have to be brought up to date, when the other cities' mayors are going to be there for 2 or 4 years. This is a very, very valid point. That being said, the commission can change that today. They can change it tomorrow. We can have a 2-year mayor if we want to, or a 3-year mayor if we want to, without changing our entire form of government.
That calls to mind. I know we're getting close to the end of our time period. There's a few questions here that are about the process of what we actually are voting on. And I'm going to kind of combine them a little bit, which will give the panelists room to comment. But one notes that how can we vote on this without knowing how the commissioners will be determined and how the districts will be determined? So that's one question. A couple of other questions that came up is sort of related to, you know, without specifying that 4 commissioners would be elected by districts, does that mean the city itself could change this at any time or could do it now if they wanted to? Could they have districts by, you know, now? And then the other piece of that also is sort of like, you know, what does it do to the political strengths of political engagement for neighborhoods? And then finally, sort of a piece of that is also, this give you a lot to chew on, but why did our city commission end up with this resolution, which seems to leave kind of unresolved the core questions that the task force put to them of what kind of a mayor do you want? Should the mayor be voting? I personally am a little uncomfortable if I don't know how my mayor would vote. I mean, that would be hard for me to vote to reelect that person. But also then by the same token, what would the new shape of the city commission be? So I think there's we leave with a better understanding of what is involved and could be involved, but not really a path forward on our decision necessarily because so much of it's embedded. I'll turn it over to the pros there.
When it comes to districts, I've been in contact with the city attorney and also with the county clerk. There are all kinds of not only guidelines, but actually legal parameters that are involved when you're drawing districts. So it's not as arbitrary as you might think. I mean, because of all the federal litigation, I mean, there's all kinds of guidelines now. But yeah, the districts will be drawn after the election if it passes, and City Commission will be deeply involved in that process, but it's not a free-for-all.
Many of you will remember that the county just went through that, and the process would look very similar. On our podcast, we did interview Jamie Shu, and he was able to kind of walk us through what a lot of those questions and answer a lot of those questions. So if you're interested, I definitely recommend that. Our Jamie Shu is an expert in so many ways, and I sleep at night knowing that he's on deck watching out for our votes. So it was a very valuable interview, and we got a lot of good answers on that.
So Courtney, maybe you ought to tell people how they can access the podcast.
Yeah, it's called Lawrence Asks Why. It's on iHeartMusic and I think Amazon Prime, whatever the audio version of Amazon Prime is. I actually have a barcode I can put up here in a second if people want to try to access that just by clicking on the barcode, but we can finish our discussion here if you would like. But we interviewed, I think, about 12 or 13 former mayors, former commissioner, community members, as we said, city manager, city attorney, also to talk about, okay, if this goes forward, what are the next steps? Which I think is also very important for people to understand how that will work out. And there's a lot of the details. Something that came up earlier that also we didn't really address is if you add commissioners, you're adding costs. So right now commissioners make $20,000. A question unanswered is then will the directly elected mayor expect to get more than the commissioners? That those things will not be addressed or settled until after the vote.
No, but you want to be careful when it comes to the money part, because I remember one of our grads, Tom Lewinson, he was the city manager in Kansas City, Missouri. And he told me one time, he said, John, with the amount of money that these council members are making, this is probably the best job they'll ever have.
Yeah, our commissioners make $20,000.
Yeah. So you want to keep things in perspective. Yeah. This is not a full-time job.
Oh, I disagree with that.
Well,
it is a full-time job, but I
Yeah.
think it's very important for the people out there to ask themselves whether they should be paid like it's a full-time job. The workload is, and we just definitely learned this speaking with former mayors, just the amount of correspondence that you get is astronomical compared to many of the people we talked to who were mayors before the internet was a thing.
Yeah.
And so that workload is significant. It is fair to expect them to be responsive to your emails and phone calls, and it's also fair to pay them like they're gonna. So the community should definitely be having those conversations, but that conversation won't happen until after you vote for it.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Very good. Well, I want to thank both of our panelists, Courtney Shipley and John Nalbedean. Both of you have provided very, very good insights, and I certainly appreciate the obvious respect that you have for one another, even though you might disagree on some of these issues, but certainly your respect and reverence for each other shows through on this Zoom call. So thank you for that in our politics, if you know what I mean. So with that said, I think we will conclude our webinar. So again, thank you, John and Courtney. Pat, thank you very much for being the question triage person. And with that, I think we'll call it a day.